Hello everyone. Here we will see the notes of John Eyre, novel by Charlotte Bronte. If you did not subscribe my channel, please subscribe for more videos. Introduction: John Eyre, novel by Charlotte Bronte. First published in 1847 as John Eyre, an autobiography with career Bell listed as the editor. Widely considered a classic, it gave new truthfulness to the Victorian novel with its realistic portrayal of the inner life of a woman. Nothing her struggles with her natural desire and social condition. When the novel begins, the title character is a 10-year-old orphan who lives with her uncle's family. Her parents had died of typhus. Other than the nursemaid, the family ostracizes Jane. Shall we see about poet? Charlotte Bronte was an English novelist and poet, the eldest of the three Bronte sisters who survived into adulthood and whose novels became classic of English literature. Bronte's first manuscript, The Professor, did not secure a publisher, although she was heartened by an encouraging response from the Smith elder and co of Cornhill, who expressed an interest in any longer works Carel Bell might wish to send. Bronte suspended by finishing and sending a second manuscript in August 1847. 6 weeks later, Jane Y was published. It tells the story of a plain governess, Jane, who, after difficulties in her early life, falls in love with the employer, Mr. Rochester. They marry, but only after Rochester's insane first wife, of whom Jane initially has no knowledge, dies in dramatic house fire. The book's style was innovative, combining romanticism, naturalism with gothic melodrama, and broke new ground of being written from an intensively evoked first person female perspective. Lived Bronte believed art was most convincing when based on personal experience in Jane Eyre. She transformed the experience into a novel. Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre, novel by Charlotte Bronte, first published in 1847 as Jane Eyre, an autobiography with Carel Bell listed as the editor. Widely considered a classic, it gave new truthfulness to the Victorian novel by its realistic portrayal of the inner life of a woman. Nothing her struggles with her natural desires and social condition. When the novel begins, the title character is a 10-year-old orphan who lives with her uncle's family. Her parents had died of typhus. Other than the nursemaid, the family ostracizes Jane. She is later sent to the Astaire Lowood Institution, a charity school, where she and other girls are mistreated. Lowood, as the name suggests, in the low point in Jane's young life. In the face of such advertising, however, they gather strength and confidence. In early adulthood, after several years as a student and then teacher at Lowood, Jane masters the courage to live. She finds work as a governess at Thornfield Hall, where she meets her dashing and Byronic employer, the wealthy and impetuous Edward Rochester. At Thornfield, Jane looks after young Adele, the daughter of a French dancer who was one of Rochester's mistresses, and is befriended by the kindly housekeeper Mrs. Alice Fairfax. Jane falls in love with Rochester, though he is expected to marry the snobbish and socially prominent Blanche Ingram. Rochester eventually reciprocates Jane's feelings and proposes marriage. However, on their wedding day, Jane discovers that Rochester cannot legally marry her because he already has a wife, Bertha Mason, who has gone mad and is locked away on the third floor because of her violent behavior. Her presence experience the strange noises Jane has heard heard in the mansion, believing that he has trickled into that marriage. Rochester feels justified in pursuing her relationship with the Jane. He pleased with her to join him in France, where they can live as a husband and wife, despite the legal prohibitions. But Jane refuses on principle and feels Thornfield. Jane is taken in by people she later discovers are her cousins. One of them is Saint John, a principal clergyman. He gives her a job and soon proposes marriage, suggesting that she join him as a missionary in India. Jane initially agrees to leave him, but not as his wife. However, Saint John preserves her to reconsider his proposal, and a wavering Jane finally appeals to heaven to show her what to do. Just then, she hears a mesmeric call from Rochester. Jane returns to Thornfield to find the estate burned, set on fire by Rochester's wife, who then jumped into her death. Rochester, in an attempt to save her, was blinded. Reunited, Jane and Rochester marry. Rochester later regains some of his sight, and then the couple have a son. The book was originally published in 3 volumes as Jane Eyre, an autobiography, with Currer Bell listed as the editor, though some complained that is the anti-Catholic the work and success. Bertha Mason character. Bertha Mason, fictional character, the trailer wife of Edward Rochester in Jane Eyre, 1847 by Charlotte Bronte and Wide Sargasso 1966 by Jane Rice. Wide Sargasso novel by Jane Rice, published in 1966, a well received work of fiction. It takes its theme and main character from the novel Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. The book details of the life of Antelete Mason, known in Jane Eyre as Bertha Mason, a West Indian who marries an unnamed man in Jamaica and returns with him to his home in England, locked in a lawless marriage and settled in an inhospitable climate. Antoinette goes mad and is frequently violent. Her husband continues her to the attic of his house at Thornfield. Only he and Grace Poole, the attendant he has hired to care for her, know of Antinette's existence. The reader gradually learns that Antinette's unnamed husband is Mr. Rochester, later to become the beloved of Jane Eyre. Much of the action of the novel takes place in the West Indies. The first and third sections are narrated by Antoinette, the middle section of her husband. One of the most controversial yet essential plot element of Charlotte Bronte's widely believed novel Jane Eyre is her description of Bertha Mason, Mr. Rochester's first wife, a beautiful, cruel woman who is ranged by mental illness and is hidden away. Locked up in a lonely room at Thornfield, many criticizers have decried Bronte's delineation of Bertha as both the racist and insensitive portrayal of sanity. Her sensationalistic approach to describe a character suffering from mental illness during the Victorian era, while lending the Gothic elements of suspense and intrigue to her cleverly crafted and brilliantly executed novel, nevertheless remains rather unsettling for modern readers who may often wonder where her views towards mental illness reflects the prevalent attitudes of our day. An examination of artistic contemporary with the initial publication of Jane Eyre in 1847 surprisingly reveals that awareness of mental patient Bertha Mason is she an abused lady in Jane Eyre? Questioning. It is a question here. Bertha, an abused lady. Charlotte Bronte's narrative doubling and 19th century attitudes towards madness and ethnicity. Before we actually find out what about Bertha Mason's existence, we are aware of her as an uneasy and even threatening presence. She is the source of the mysterious, mocking laugh at Jane hears as she stands on the battlement of Thornfield Hall. Desperate for freedom from domestic routine. She is responsible for setting fire to Mr. Rochester's bed, attacking Mr. Mason, and tearing Jane's evil on the eye of her wedding. Even we finally meet her, she is dissipated in language that degrades and dehumanizes. She is a clothed hyena and a figure described using a neutral pronoun it. Nevertheless, he plied that of the mad woman in the attic. The character behind the title of Sundara Gilbert and Susan Guber, famous study of the 19th century woman writers, means that she is an object of the sympathy as well as of fear. The narrative strategies used by the Charlotte Bronte clearly designate Bertha as other. She is the obstacle that stands in the way of Jane's marriage to Rochester. She is surrounded by the web of Gothic imagery described as a goblin and a vampire who threatens to drain her. Yet criticizers have seen this othering of Bertha as highly problematic. One particularly troubling aspect of Bertha is her psychological instability. Rochester clearly sees her as a responsible for her own situation. He tells Jane that Bertha came of a mad family with a mother who has a mad woman and a drunkard, but also that, like a beautiful child, and she copied her parent in both points, implying a degree of choice. Bronte's depiction of Bertha drew on contemporary descriptions of mental illness, such as those she found in the family's medical encyclopedia. This survives, is well thumbed, and clearly frequently consulted. It would be easy to see Rochester's lack of sympathy as representative of general attitudes towards mental illness in 19th century society. However, as Mia Ivan has pointed out, these attitudes were changing. In a review of 1844 report by the Metropolitan Commissioners on Lucancy, the review reported that the disposition of the public towards the mental illness ill and becoming more enlightened and benevolent. The review promoted the idea that patient in mental illness ought to be given the benefit of the cheerful lookout on a pleasing prospect, and that those responsible for their care should avoid everything which might given to the patient the impression he is in prison. Was Charlotte Bronte aware of the changes? If so, what might this suggest for our interpretation of Rochester? Another source of complexity is Bertha's ethnicity. She is clear and daughter of the white European settler in the West Indies. Bronte leaves the precious nature of her ethnicity ambiguous, but reference to her dark, ambiguous ethnicity. It is interesting to note that even as a wild coral, Bertha would have been seen alien. In the 18th and 19th century, many European writers in the West Indies sought to associate Careless with the native Canadian population. Caribbean population as a way of distancing them from civilized Europeans. This was particularly the case for Creole women, who were often despited as self-willed, descendant, and untrustworthy, the very essence of Rochester's description of Bertha. Perhaps the most problematic aspect of Bertha, however, is the fact the other bad animal in Jane Eyre is many ways Jane polar opposite, has been described by Gilbert and Guber as a Jane's trust and darkest. Conclusion. Jane Eyre is a novel written by Charlotte Bronte, follows the story of Jane, a seemingly plain and simple girl as she battles through life struggles. Jane has many obstacles in her life, her cruel and abusive Aunt Reed and grim conditions at Lowood School, her love for Rochester and Rochester's marriage to Bertha, Jane's struggle for self-realization, her perseverance in the face of adversity, and her strong Personality and wisdom make her one of the few examples of strong women in Victorian literature. For a Victorian era, was a spunky, outspoken, and entirely captivating to me. In the book Jane, where Charlotte Bronte goes through such corrupt and detrimental life alternations that one would at least believe Jane deserves a happy ending. If you like my explanation, please subscribe my channel. Thank you.